I appreciate you taking the time to let me speak to you. First of all, I would love to thank county management for all the hard work that they do. I know that they put a lot of work into budget, and you guys put a lot of work and time and thought into the budgets that are presented to you. But I wanted to give you guys just a little update and help you to understand why I think that I need the two positions that I've asked for. What kind of concerned me a little bit is that I'm the only person, department head, that's here asking for these positions and fighting for these positions. So that leads me to kind of think of, is that because I was the only one that didn't get positions and everybody else is happy with what they got? Or is it just that the people were asking for positions and they weren't willing to fight for them? So I am here to let you know that I need these positions in the office, and I gave you guys some additional information that may help you, and I brought some things with me too to kind of show you, if you would oblige me for just a couple of minutes. I think that one of the root things to the coroner's office is that not a lot of people really understand what we do and how we do that. And if you'll give me a little leeway, I want to give you just a brief little story. About 4 weeks ago, I got a county email that was to all department heads. So I opened the email, and it said something to the effect of stormwater management mandatory video that you must watch. I thought about it for a second, and I'm like, I don't have anything to do with stormwater management. Click, delete. 2 days later, I get another email from the same person that had generated the first email. So I opened it, and I'm reading the body of the email. And the body of the email basically goes something like this. We have decided that this is not a mandatory video for all employees of York County, only for the employees of the departments that are listed in the body of this email. So I read through the email. Coroner's office was listed as number 2. So I'm sitting there and I'm reading it and I'm thinking and I'm like, what in the world does the coroner's office have to do with stormwater management? The only thing I could think of was, let's say we have a flash flood in York County, and I have a victim that is swept away, and they're caught, and they drowned, and they're caught in our stormwater management, our stormwater tubes or drains in the county. So I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, so I was like, okay, I'm going to call the person that generated the email. So I picked up the phone, and I called, and I said, this is Sabrina Gast. And there was this moment of silence, and then there was a giggle. And he said, I was wondering how long it was going to take you to call me. And I said, well, can you explain to me why coroner's office employees are required to watch a stormwater management video? If you can explain that to me, I will be happy to oblige. We had a brief conversation, and he said, well, I talked to my management, and they decided that we needed to include you in on this mandatory video. I said, okay, if management's decided that we need to watch this video, I'll be happy to do so. So tomorrow morning, my office is having a mandatory meeting, and we're going to watch a video on stormwater management. The reason that I tell you this is in that conversation with this individual, they honestly thought that I took bodies out into a parking lot and hosed them down. I don't see a look. I'm confused as to why we had to do this, but my staff is going to watch the video tomorrow morning in our staff meeting for stormwater management. I did not bring the video, the email with me, but if you would like that, I'll be happy to pass that along, because I'm looking at Mr. Shanahan over here trying to figure out why. So I tell you that quick little story to illustrate that even I would imagine that most of you sitting here really don't understand what we do in the coroner's office. So I have requested 2 positions that were actually denied in the budget cycle. So I would like to kind of explain to you why I think that I need those 2 positions. We, like every other department in this county, is growing. The number of cases that we see is growing. The type of cases that we see requires a lot more in-depth investigation than what it did in the past. We have requested another deputy investigator and an office administrative person. What we deem that title is a cremation specialist, because the coroner's office is responsible for issuing any cremation permit that's requested in the county for anybody that wants to cremate their loved one as their final disposition. And as part of that process, the office actually has to review that paperwork, make sure that it's signed appropriately, that it seems like it's filled out appropriately if it's not something that our office has actively investigated, and then we have to issue that permit for that cremation. We do about 1,000 of those in a year. And I think that number is kind of low. I think that we may have missed a few of those that we report. But our office staff is, in addition to everything else that they do in the office, are additionally required to do those cremation permits. So I would like to have that administrative person to help with the cremation permits and to also help with our evidence login. I had a deputy about 2 weeks ago that was on call for the weekend. In one of her cases, when she went out on, she came back with 3 or 4 bags of medications that she was required to count. It took her 6 hours to count pills for one case. And that's with an automated pill counter. That's not counting them by hand. That's dumping them into a machine that counts them for us, and you have to log the numbers down. It is a tremendous amount of evidence that we pull into the office that we are required to keep as part of that death investigation. So not only do we have investigative obligations out on the scene, but we have those when we get back to the office as well. We have had over almost 600 cases this year so far, since January 1st. When I came onto this job in 2006, we had 500 for the year. So we have quadrupled the number of cases that we're seeing. We have, in the past 2 years, gotten a full-time deputy coroner. Thank you to the council for that, but it was a long time overdue. We were way behind comparing ourselves to other counties in the state. If you would look through what I have given you there, we've given you kind of the breakdown and with additional details on why we had requested those additional positions, both the cremation specialist and the deputy coroner position. I've also put in there our annual report. That annual report is something that we are required to produce every year as part of our accreditation process, and it goes through everything that our office has done. Just about every case that we have handled, it breaks it down into the different types of cases that we see, the number of cases that we see. It even goes so far as to tell you how many cases each deputy is actually investigating, how many cases we send to autopsy, how many cases we're sending to the forensic pathologist in Charleston, how many cases are we paying to transport. Gives you more definitive numbers on the types of cases and what we're having to do for those cases when we see them. We are seeing a huge increase in our drug overdose deaths. As you all are very aware that we have an opioid problem here in York County, so that has increased the number of cases that we see. It also increases the number of toxicology tests that we see and the money that we're having to pay out for those. So those additionally, that's additional time that those deputies have to work to make sure that those tests are sent out appropriately. Behind that annual report, you'll see a comparison of the counties that are closest to us as far as their caseload and the number of people that they staff. Probably our closest is probably going to be Lexington County. They had 2,400 cases last year. We had about right at 2,000. We have the same number of full-time investigators, but if you'll see, they have 4 part-time investigators, of which we have none. They have, and 2 office staff. And then the next one up would probably be Spartanburg. We can kind of compare ourselves more to Spartanburg because of the types of cases that we see, the demographics and whatnot. He has 8 full-time investigators, 2 part-time investigators, and 5 volunteer investigators that actually work with him. And all of those deputies are going out on scenes and conducting investigations. And on that, he also has 3 office staff that help him with that caseload. So we are asking to increase our number from 7 full-time investigators, which includes me. I still take primary call on days as well and do investigations out on scenes. And so we're asking to increase that to 8 and to increase our office staff to 3. You'll also see on there, if you'll notice, Greenville County, they had 4,500 cases, and they only have 9 full-time investigators. But if you look at that little box underneath there, Greenville County pays their investigators by the hour. They're not salaried, and they're paying anywhere from 40 to 80 hours overtime for every investigator that's working in that office. So you can see that there's lots of work that is done there. Just for some additional information so that you kind of know kind of how we're dealing, you'll see some photographs behind those numbers. You'll see our refrigerator and our freezer in our evidence room. It is full to the brim. That is biological evidence that we cannot destroy due to the DNA Preservation Act. And you also have photographs of our evidence room, which are also full. That evidence has to be saved. Those things we cannot destroy. We have a cycle of 2 to 3 years for those types of things that we can kind of go through and purge, but we're not able to get rid of that. Behind that, you'll see a picture of our lovely little break room. We did ask this year for another refrigerator and a freezer to house additional biological evidence. We have nowhere to store those, so they will be placed in our break room. In that little nook where you see the table will be our biological evidence that is going to be locked into an evidence storage room, storage refrigerator and a storage freezer in the same area that we make lunch and our drinks in, just so that you're aware. We all know that we have another hospital coming here, potentially 2 in the very near future with the freestanding ER that Piedmont is putting on Gold Hill Road. And we also have the other hospital in Fort Mill that's going to be coming up. When I talked to Piedmont, the first question I asked them about this freestanding ER on Gold Hill Road was, are they putting a morgue there? Their answer was no, people aren't going to die here. I hope that they have now taken the information that I have given them and they have worked with CMC, because CMC thought the same thing when they put in Steel Creek. They thought that people weren't going to die there. Think about all of the residents in TK and Fort Mill that would normally travel from that area to Charlotte, and in essence, they have crossed a state line, so I no longer have jurisdiction. They're now going to stop at that freestanding ER if you have somebody that's critical, because they have to stop to get that baseline and to get that patient stabilized. If that individual dies at that ER, it is going to be my responsibility to investigate that death, so I'm having to put boots on the ground to go there, and there's nowhere to store that body. I'm going to have transport pick up that body from the freestanding ER and transport them back to the Piedmont main hospital. That is going to be the responsibility of the county. That is not Piedmont's responsibility. That is going to increase the number of deaths that we're seeing. And I know that if you don't live in this world, you probably have never really thought about the fact that people are going to die at that freestanding ER and that it's going to increase our caseload. Behind the photographs, I provided you with some statistical numbers for the ER deaths that we see at Piedmont. In 2017, we had 68. In 2018, we had 57. And then the in-house deaths are on there as well. So we see not only ER deaths, but in-hospital deaths too. So we fully anticipate those numbers to increase, and with the new hospital in Fort Mill, that's going to also increase the number of cases that we're seeing. I really feel like that I try to be very prudent in requesting things from council, because I know that we have a budget that we have to work within. I am not in the habit of asking for things that I don't think that we need. And we have several things on our budget that I have no control over. I cannot control how many people die in York County. Therefore, I can't control how many autopsies I have to do, how many consults I have to do, the amount of money that I have to send on toxicology and transport. Those are 4 budgetary items that I have no control over. And we've already gone over in 2 of those items this year. So we've had to put those accounts in override because we have spent more money than is allowed in that budget. I would like for you to just pay close attention to the budget this year, because some of those same accounts that we requested additional funds in, we weren't given the additional funds. So I would like for you to look at that really closely and make a judgment call on that and see that we really do need the funds. It's not that we're just asking for it just for kicks and giggles. There are decedents in this county and families that we need to take care of, and I'm hoping that you will reconsider management's decision. I will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
do have one question. It's probably, I just don't have, not familiar with what you do at all, not at all.
I told you.
I need to come and take a tour. But I don't really
Please
want to
come.
take a tour.
Yes.
I'll go with you. I'll go with you.
Bump and I we're gonna take a tour together.
Okay.
So do you have to do an autopsy on everybody?
Lord, no, because
Okay,
that would kill our budget.
I'm just curious, how do you determine when there is one?
So an autopsy is determined based on the scene investigation or what we may have, what the investigators actually find. We only autopsy about 10% of the cases that we see, and that's United States wide, is usually about 10% of the cases that are actually investigated, boots on the ground, actually get autopsies.
Is it?
That's all.
First off, I want to apologize for the wheels of government taking so long to kind of catch up. Like you said, when you started in, I think, 07, was your first year. The number of investigations you had compared to now. So I apologize for us taking so long to catch up. My next question, well, my first question is, would you consider looking at part-timers versus going to 2 full-timers right away?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I would consider that, yes.
And my second question is similar to what Allison asked, but I want to know what prompts an investigation, because not every death gets investigated, correct?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So there are certain statutory guidelines that there are certain types of deaths that require a coroner's investigation. Anything that is unusual or suspicious, if they don't have a regular physician, if they die outside of the hospital, if it looks like it's homicide, suicide, or an accident, we typically do not respond to calls where there is a hospice agency involved and the hospice nurse is on site, or if someone dies in a nursing home. We don't typically respond to those. We always get the phone calls for those, because what we found many years ago was that we were having deaths that were occurring and our office had not been notified on that death, and there was something that needed to be investigated by a coroner that wasn't, and a physician signed that death certificate. And who do you think gets that death certificate 9 months down the road if it's signed improperly? Doesn't go back to the doctor, comes to me. So I'm the one that's responsible for going back and reopening those wounds and getting all the medical records, investigating, working with the healthcare staff and all of those things. So what we did is we now require the nursing homes and the hospice agencies to report those deaths to us so that we get that information on the front end to decide right then and there, is that something we need to put boots on the ground and go to? Because there are times when we have to go out on hospice calls and we have to go to nursing home calls where we have nurses or the staff is unsure of why the person died, or maybe there's medication that's missing out from a hospice case that, they filled the Roxanol yesterday, but they came out this morning and it's completely gone. There's things there that need to be investigated, and now we have somebody that they weren't really expecting to die within 10 hours that is now deceased. So we do put boots on the ground for those types of cases. We also get notified from the hospital because of the same reason. And if you'll allow me just a couple minutes, I'll give you a great case scenario. Let's say we have a little lady that is 83 years old. She lives at home by herself. She does her own grocery shopping. She drives to the grocery store one afternoon. She comes home. She steps out of her car. She steps on the curb. She falls down. She breaks a hip. She goes to the hospital. She gets her hip repaired. She then has to go to rehab because she's learning to have to walk again. While she's in rehab, she doesn't do very well. She's kind of slow to turn around, and she gets pneumonia. And she dies from her pneumonia. Is that something that our offices should be investigating? Yes, it is. What we were finding is that most of the physicians would sign that out as cause of death, pneumonia, natural. That's not a natural death. That is cause of death, pneumonia, due to limited mobility, due to hip fracture, due to fall, accident. And why does that make a difference? If that little lady has an accidental death policy, her family gets more money for that death policy that they've been paying on for years, with it being classified correctly as an accidental death versus a natural death. So that's why your coroners are involved in nursing home deaths and falls and hospital deaths and all of those types of things. So it does make a difference to both the families and statistical reasons and everything else that go along with the death certificate reporting.
Insurance companies take your decision on it versus their own investigation?
They will do their own investigation, but yes, they will ultimately take the decision of what's on that death certificate.
Insurance companies?
At least in my experience, they would.
So, in a case like that, is that something that the family requests and the family pays for? Or is that something that the county pays for?
In that type of scenario, we probably wouldn't do an autopsy on her. Based on, we would do medical records review, we would do maybe a scene investigation, interview the staff at the hospital and the nursing home, and then we would put all of those together. So that person probably wouldn't get an autopsy unless there was something else going on there.
So does a family ever pay for does anybody ever pay for autopsies outside of, like,
They do.
Okay.
Sometimes we refuse to do autopsies because they are expensive and they are taxpayer dollars that are paying for these autopsies. So if we have, and actually we deal with it a good bit, actually. So if we have an older person that has, diabetes, heart disease, they're obese, they smoke 2 packs a day, they're on home O2, they went to bed last night, they're complaining of chest pain, but they didn't want to go to the doctor because they were too hard-headed, and they're dead the next morning when family finds them. That's not something that we are going to do an autopsy on. We're going to take the scene findings that we have, the medical history, what that family tells us when we go and what we see, and we're going to sign that out as a natural death. Now, we do have families that will say, well, I want to know what killed mama. We try to explain to them what autopsies will tell you and what they won't. And then if they still are insistent on an autopsy, then they can pay for an autopsy as a private individual. And then our office will assist them with giving them autopsy contacts. This is how you get your loved one from A to B, but you are responsible for that autopsy. Private autopsies are very expensive. They start out at about $3,500 a pop, and that doesn't include toxicology analysis. So usually once you throw that number out to a family, usually they decline and they'll go on based on what the coroner's investigation is at the time.
We got so many what you gave us and what the staff gave us, so you can help me a little bit. But do I remember right, the last 3 years, we've given you 1 extra staff member each year?
Last 2 years.
Last 2 years. And so I think for the notes here, the growth in the general departments of the county have been 42%. Your office has been 117%. And just another thing I looked at, causes of death for the last, I guess it was the last statistical analysis, 2017, York County, 2153, comparing to Horry County, 3637, but yet, if I'm looking at the right numbers,
Can
they
you
have...
tell me, where are you looking? Is it
this is
information that I gave you?
No, this is some
Okay.
of the information staff gave us.
Okay.
But with that number included, Horry County's got like 1 less staff member than York County. And they have, of course, more opioid deaths and problems like that at the beach.
Yep.
So it's like, well, of course, from my perspective is if they're doing great with less people, a lot more population, a lot more problems, where am I not connecting
They
here?
also don't do as in-depth investigations as this office does.
What do you mean when you say that? You saying they don't go through a pathologist?
They do go to a pathologist, but a pathologist is not an entire investigation. It's only a little part. So an autopsy is just a part of a death investigation. Just for instance, this is the medical records and all of the investigative components of one case. We do a lot more investigations in this county than other county offices do. And that is because I drive that. Because I feel like the citizens of York County deserve that. And that's not something I'm willing to compromise on.
So if the pathologist is doing the death investigation,
Nope,
like what,
pathologist does the autopsy.
well, and what I'm talking about is how this person died. What are you investigating?
I'm sorry?
What are you investigating?
We're doing this, the scene, that the pathologist has an entire death investigation is a mixture of a scene investigation, witness interviews, medical records reviews, pharmacy, prescription drug reviews, anything that may be going on at that point in time. You're gonna do a thorough scene investigation with photographs and talking to witnesses. Autopsy is part of that, but it's just a small part. An autopsy is not gonna always tell you exactly what's going on with that individual. Doing an autopsy in isolation is not as helpful as one would think.
So where's the line between law enforcement and what you do
Law
in terms
enforcement,
of that investigation?
so I kind of like to describe it as a parallel investigation. I can't work for law enforcement can't work for me, and that's the way the statute is written. So we do a very similar investigation, kind of like a checks and balances of that death investigation. 99% of the time, the coroner's office and law enforcement comes out at the same conclusion at the end as far as what is found during that investigation, and we agree on what the ultimate manner and cause of death is at the time, based on the coroner's investigation, a law enforcement investigation, and a forensic autopsy.
So the pathologist decision, I guess I'm wondering, when he says this person died this way, and y'all come up with something else, who decides who's right?
Okay, so the pathologist is required to come up with the cause of death. Stab wound to the chest. Anterior MI. Whatever
Right.
whatever that medical condition was that caused that individual to die. A stab wound to the chest can be either a homicide or a suicide. That is the responsibility of the coroner to make sure that they're doing that investigation to determine the manner of death of that individual.
Not law enforcement.
Not law enforcement, no. That is not the responsibility of law enforcement. Law enforcement's objective is to determine if there's a crime that has occurred, and if it has, who did it, and work out all of those circumstances. The coroner's responsibility is to figure out how that person died, the manner in which they actually died. And we have 5 of those in the classification system.
We're just going to kind of work our way straight down. I'm going to ask a quick question while we're doing that. I noticed that Spartanburg and Richland County have 5 volunteer investigators. Greenville has 2. What is a volunteer investigator?
They work free of charge. So they are deputized for that coroner, and they work free of charge. I don't think that's a very good, I don't want to do that in my office, because I don't think that you have a lot of accountability and responsibility in a volunteer person. Volunteer people work as part of our care team in our office, but as far as putting them in being responsible for an actual death investigation, I personally am not interested in having a volunteer investigator in my office. We used to have part-time investigators in the office until about 2015, 2014, where we would pay them by the call that they went out on. So they were on call for us, and when they went out to do an actual investigation, they were paid for their time of being out on that investigation. If we had the opportunity to have that back, I would love that. I think maybe that would work as well. But those are some other options that are there.
Sabrina, how many certified medical investigators do you have?
I have 7. There's 7. Everybody in the office, no, excuse me, I have 6 that are actually certified. The newest member that was hired last year has not sat for the certification exam yet.
Yeah, are they ranked in levels, like 1 through 5?
For
Like
certifications?
Yeah, certification.
So the certifications come in 2 different levels. You have a board certified, and then you have a fellow. I have 1 fellow, that's me, and everybody else is board certified. And there's certain criteria that you have to meet to get the fellow certification.
And just one last passing comment. You all should not waste your time watching the storm water video tomorrow.
Thank you.
And that we can I'm sure Mr. Shanahan will talk to you about that later, but that seems not to be a high priority for you tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Can we opt her out tonight, 7 of us?
Check that box. Sabrina, thank you for what you do for the county, and I appreciate the passion that you do it with. I will certainly make a commitment to you, and I'll read through everything that you've just given us tonight. It's a lot of stuff. I will say that there were a ton of positions that were asked for, and a lot of them are being denied, so I can at least say that
That makes me
point.
feel a little bit better, being that I'm the only one up here standing here wanting this position really badly.
One question that I do have with the materials that you've put up, one of the comments says with the cremation specialist you're requesting, it says that this person will be responsible for billing the funeral home for the permits. Is that something that you generate revenue from?
Yes. So every cremation permit that is issued from our office is, the funeral homes are actually billed, and then they pass that on to the family. But we charge $20. It's not very much. Basically, it helps to cover the time that we have to do the investigative component of it to make sure that it's signed correctly. A lot of times when we get cremation permits that are signed, when we have a death certificate that's signed by a physician, a lot of times we'll have to go back and call that physician and do some further investigation. We have some physicians in the county that love to put cardiac arrest as a cause of death on a death certificate, and I won't accept that. Because everybody that dies of cardiac arrest. You have to tell me what caused that cardiac arrest. Is it due to failure to thrive because he's got Parkinson's disease? Is it because he had a heart attack? Something caused your cardiopulmonary system to stop working, and that is the definition of death. So we have to go back and track doctors down, and they're seeing patients, and they don't want to talk to us, and then we're having to talk to nurses, and so we have to track them down a lot. So it takes a lot of effort sometimes to get back to those physicians to get that additional information.
Is that permit, are you capped at what you can charge, or I guess why wouldn't you
We are
charge what the
not.
cost it would be?
We are not capped at what we can charge. We are probably about mainstream with the rest of the state. There's some counties that don't charge anything, which I think you're missing some challenges there. But I think the highest cost for the state is they may charge $45 for a cremation. I don't want to charge that much because it is passed on through to the family, and they're having to deal with other issues going on. $25 is what $20. It is $20, correct? $20 when she's done the thing. $20 is all we have ever charged for that. And that is a form. And the reason that we charge for that is a request of the family. That is not something that is mandatory for everybody. Like, there are other permits that we issue too. So everybody that is moved in the county has to have a permit to do so. Our office also issues all those. But that is a requirement by the state for that body to have a permit. It's called a BRT permit. We don't charge for that because that's a requirement that everybody has to have. A cremation permit is a choice that the family has chosen, and they're asking for that permit to cremate their loved one. So that's why we feel like it's kind of okay to charge for that, for the expertise to review those reports and get those issued to the funeral homes.
I'll just say thank you for what you do. I did get to spend part of a day with you a few years back, and these shelves and refrigerators look a little fuller than they were when I went through. I was very impressed with your office and what y'all do and the time I spent there. I got to see the morgue and everything. The only thing we didn't do is have a call that day, which I'm probably thankful for, but definitely, a call would have been somebody lost a family member. But I've always been very impressed with your office and with the care that you have for our residents and their families and what they go through. And in the past, I think I've supported you on every request you've had just about. I'm not telling you I will or I won't at this point. I'm telling you, kind of like Christy did, I will look at all the information and make the best decision I can. We did have a lot of people request a lot of positions, and everybody sitting out there would be hunting us down, and if we approved all of them, and their taxes would go through the roof. So But as I do with everything, I'll look at all the information, and I certainly appreciate what you do, so.
Sabrina, I have had the opportunity to tour your office, and I can attest to the fact that y'all are drowning in stacks of evidence. There's no question about that. So seeing what y'all are making do with the space there is really commendable. I have a couple questions. Can you explain a little bit the process for the autopsies? Not necessarily the medical process, but your process for instance, where the autopsies are performed, where they go, that sort of thing. Mhm.
So we historically have used York Pathology, which is at Piedmont Medical Center, to do our autopsies here. There's 3 pathologists in that group, and they have offered those services at a reduced rate compared to other facilities in the state. And I don't like calling it a problem because it's really not a problem. It's just the way it is. Those pathologists that are there, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Hart, and Dr. Stone, are not forensic certified pathologists. They are board certified anatomical and what's the other one that they are? Clinical pathologists, I believe. So they also run the lab at Piedmont. That's what they do there. There are some cases that need a forensic pathologist. That is a specialized pathologist that is trained in violent deaths, basically. So the closest pathologist that we have that is forensic certified is in Columbia. We have talked to the pathology group there in Columbia, but they didn't want to take us on as a client unless we were willing to bring them everything. I can't afford to bring them everything. So therefore the closest forensic pathologist is at MUSC in Charleston. So we have to transport our decedents. If it's a case, typically the types of cases we send there are homicides and child deaths is usually what we will send to them. If we send a case down to Charleston, we have to call and arrange that transport. Our transport will pick them up here in York County. They will transport them down to Charleston. We also send a deputy with that case for chain of custody reasons. MUSC's standard of practice is they don't allow anybody in the autopsy suite other than a coroner's office representative. So it doesn't do any good for law enforcement to go because they can't go into the autopsy suite. So a deputy goes with that body. The body is usually there that morning. Usually they try to work us into some of the first appointments for the day. And then we're back in York County by the afternoon. What we're running into now down at MUSC is that their caseload has exploded. Usually up until about a month ago, I could call right now and say, I have a forensic case that I need done tomorrow, can you do it? And they would bump us into the 9 o'clock slot in the morning, and we would have them down Charleston County and back the next day. More often than not in the last few weeks, because MUSC's caseload has exploded so much, we waited for 4 days? 4 days to do an autopsy on a forensic case that we needed done. So you're holding up autopsy time, you're increasing the amount of time of when you're going to do that autopsy, so you're running the risk of missing things, and you're holding that family's time schedule up for funeral arrangements as well. In this particular case, the family did understand, and they were okay with us waiting for 4 days. But that, unfortunately, I think that's probably going to become more and more frequent due to the caseload that MUSC is seeing. And the reason they're seeing that caseload explosion is because all of the other little counties around the state are also sending their cases to MUSC because one of the pathologists that used to do it is no longer practicing. So everything's going to Charleston.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what the process for requesting a cremation permit looks like and why that is so time-consuming?
Sure. So when a cremation permit is requested, the requesting funeral home has to send in a request. It's just a piece of paper that says, I'm Barron Funeral Home. I need a cremation permit on this decedent.
They mail that?
No, we fax things.
Okay.
Funeral homes still have faxes, so we have a fax machine. So they will send in that request. We have to have a completed death certificate, which sometimes can be a challenge because you can't get doctors to sign death certificates in a timely fashion sometimes. But the death certificate has to be completed. The person that receives that is typically Natalie. So Natalie is my office manager, so she does the office stuff and she does cremation permits as well. So she'll get that request in. She reviews everything. We have to make sure that they're certain that it's been certified, that it's been deemed certified so that nothing can go back in and be changed on the death certificate because everything is web-based now, so we have to make sure that they can't go back in and change it after we've issued a cremation permit. So all of that has to be checked, and then we fill out a form. We say, yes, you can have the cremation permit, and then we fax it back. We have to wait for 24 hours by law for that cremation permit to be issued. From the time of death, they have to wait for 24 hours. The reason for that is so that gives family time to come forward and say, I think Uncle Bobby killed Aunt Susie. I need you to investigate. Sometimes that does happen. So there's a 24-hour window. A quick cremation aren't the ones that we typically have the issues with. The ones that we're having the issues with are when you have a doctor that puts cardiac arrest or they've signed it inappropriately. I really wish that I had brought you a sample. I have a wall of shame in my office that has all of the death certificates and how physicians sign them out. Y'all need to come and view that. You would be amazed at how they sign death certificates out. So then we have to send it back and we have to say, we can't accept that death. I can't give you a cremation permit based on this death certificate. What additional information can you get me? We may have to subpoena more medical records. We may have to interview the doctor. We may have to go back and interview the family. So that's what takes the time into issuing that cremation permit.
At that time, the interviewing, is that the cremation specialist that would be doing that? Or would
Yes,
that be the
cremation
investigators?
specialist that would be doing that, would be
Okay.
going and getting that information. What they would probably do is come to one of the deputies in the office and say, look what he just sent me. And would be like, yeah, no, we can't do that. And then that cremation specialist would be then getting on the phone with the doctor, tracking the doctor down, talking to the doctor, getting a request for medical records, and getting that additional information so that we can get it changed. Because getting a death certificate changed is like an act of Congress because it has now gone through DHEC, so we have to go back in and change the death certificate before we can issue the cremation permit. So yes, the cremation specialist would be responsible for doing that.
Are there any opportunities or is there any software available that could help automate that process?
It is already automated. It is automated through DHEC. So DHEC runs our web death for the state, and that is our digital format for death certificates. It is not
The cremation permit
No,
process though?
not yet. The cremation permits are coming, but that will also come through DHEC, but they haven't gotten there. They haven't gotten there yet. So they are working on the program to include both BRTs and cremation permits. They're just not there yet. So that's still hands-on in the offices.
Okay, thank you.
And this is just curiosity because so you said if it shows MI as the cause of death, you say, nope, won't take that. Did I hear that correctly?
Nope, you did not hear me correctly.
Okay.
I said, what I won't take is cardiac arrest as a cause of death. You can have cardiac arrest due to an MI, and I will take that because the MI is the medical condition that stopped the heart and caused the cardiac arrest. But cardiac arrest can be caused by anything. It can be caused from
Trauma, drugs,
gunshot wound,
CAD.
drugs, heart attack,
Yeah.
cancer. It can be caused by anything. Just giving me cardiac arrest on a death certificate doesn't really tell me much other than confirming that the individual is deceased.
Okay.
I have one last question. Other than the cremation permits, can you tell me, are there any other sources of revenue in your budget?
No. Mm-mm. Unfortunately not.
Okay.
We're not a money-making department, sorry. Just a money spending.
Any other questions? So in your notes, I haven't had a chance to look through all this yet, so I'm just kind of glancing down. Says that 1,000 permits were issued in 2018. Do you have an estimate for how many of those required y'all to go back and investigate?
I don't have an estimate. I can say that a good portion of them, and it's not always the doctor, sometimes it's the funeral home, they haven't put in all the correct information. If you've seen an abstract death certificate, they look different than an original. There's a lot more information on what they call an abstract, which is what we get to issue the permit. And so you just have to be very careful and very mindful of what you're looking at. And, you know, over the years, I've just kind of trained my eyes of where to go. For example, I mean, there's been times where a physician has signed it out, and then you get to looking in little small letters, in additional part of the death certificate that you wouldn't typically see would say that there was a fall. Well, a doctor can't sign out a fall, it's an accidental death. So it's just very important, and I'll say this as well, a lot of times we have called things because of those permits, like that we wouldn't otherwise, we don't see the death certificate unless we're signing it out, unless they request a cremation permit. So even though there may have been an investigation, we may have took a phone report, to make sure, hey, we don't need to put boots on the ground for this investigation, you're giving us sufficient information over the phone to explain why this person has died. We still, sometimes we still get the permits, no matter what, we have to issue the permit and they choose cremation, which continues to increase each year because, the calls for a funeral is outrageous. So a lot of people are turning to cremations, and so I catch a lot of things that we, through those permits and going through those. So even, and this kind of is a question about automated, even once the case becomes automated, there will still be a process there, because somebody's eyes have to look at that and say, wait a second, they didn't sign off on this, they didn't pin this, this isn't a natural, this is an accident. It hasn't been 24 hours, like there's a lot of pieces, to it that make it, and I have to do that portion on all of them. But I would say probably over 50% of them, I'm making a phone call to either the doctor or the funeral homes to say, hey, have you done this? And a lot of times the funeral homes are calling us, hey, we talked with such and such family, but we can't get back a hold of them, and we need to get a hold of them, get their social security number, because they have to have that to process the death certificate. So then we're playing, advocate, trying to make those connections, and, it's a lot more that goes into it. It's not just, shipping. If you've seen the permit, you would be like, oh, that's nothing. It's the work behind the permit. And it's very important because once the body is cremated, there's no coming back.
It's done, yep. Any other questions?
If I were your boss and you came to me and told me everything that you've said tonight, I would say that it sounds like there are a lot of inefficiencies. Some inefficiencies maybe within the department, but a lot of inefficiencies that may be out of your control. So I think that's just very interesting to me. I would be frustrated it sounds like if I had to work in your job on a daily basis, that I would be very frustrated with those inefficiencies. And I don't know who you go to. I have no idea who you go to correct those things, but something needs to be done. I mean, if you're dealing with doctors all day long, every day, that can't fill out a form properly, or a funeral home that can't get it right, there's something more wrong than the fact that you don't have enough people. That's my personal thoughts. I also, as I sit here tonight with my volunteer fire station, Bethel, the fact that you are opposed to volunteers is a little bit concerning also, only because if that makes you those people are just as dedicated as someone who's getting a check, number one, but how much can you save by having people that are doing a job because they are interested in doing a job, not because they are, and if other counties are successful at that, I think that's something that should be looked at. And I would just ask that you be open-minded about some of the things that maybe you haven't considered in the past.
And I'm not against volunteers. We do have volunteers that work in our office. If that's the way that came across, that is not the way that was intended. Because we do have volunteers that come and work as care team members in our office. I have concerns about putting investigative responsibilities for somebody that is a volunteer deputy. And maybe that's something that I need to look at a little bit further. But I have some concerns about that. So. Anything else? Okay.
quickly, we were given a lot of information regarding this. I mean, we have a fairly large stack regarding this and all personnel requests. We're now moving on to the fire budget discussion. Is management going to present something to us on that, or are we just here, how are we doing this next step? Anyone?
Mr. Chairman, I'll leave that up to you. If you'd like to hear from management as far as our recommendation, we'd be glad to give it. If you just want to hear from them, that's your prerogative, sir, and I'll take guidance as you give it.
Why don't you give your recommendation, at least so we all have it, and then we can let
Sure.
them give their presentation on, obviously on why they disagree with management.
Yeah, sure. Just briefly, sir, that and I think what may be at issue today with the Bethel Volunteer Fire Department, or the Bethel Tax District in particular, is a request for a custom pumper tanker. They had asked for in not only this year's budget, but I believe in the year before and maybe even the year before that. I can't confirm that far back. Management has looked into this at length over the last 2 years. You've been, I think, party to some of the emails, especially last year when the recommendation was denied. Then I think our point with the pumper tanker was that we feel that there's adequate water supply in that district between what apparatus the department has and the mutual aid apparatus that would be automatically responding. Furthermore, the recommendation in this budget somewhat mirrors last year's recommendation that they hire personnel. Last year, two full-time positions were budgeted for Bethel, and this year we're recommending 1 full-time and 2 part-time positions. I think that the trends, not only in this county but nationwide, are moving towards personnel as a priority for a number of these departments in lieu of apparatus. I think the Fitch study was very clear that we have an adequate, if not excessive, number of frontline pumpers and ancillary pieces of equipment. What we are lacking is personnel to move that equipment around. So just very briefly, that kind of gives you the 30,000-foot reason for our recommendation.
Thank you. We will now hear from the Bethel Fire Tax District.
Give me just a moment to get ready. That would be great. Thank you. Appreciate your time today. All right. I think you know why we're here. We do disagree with the recommendations that have been made. But before I get started, I just wanted to say good evening to all of our York County Council members, and thank you for your time today. My name is Jennifer Riddle, and I am the chairwoman of the Bethel Fire Tax District Advisory Board. And with me today, I do want to introduce a couple of folks who will speak. So with me today, representing 139 years of combined fire service, are Volunteer Chief Love, Assistant Volunteer Chief Robinson, Captain Sawyers, Volunteer Firefighter Costello, and former Volunteer Firefighter Capicelli. I and my fellow board members and firefighters are prepared to answer any questions that you have after today's presentation, so thank you. I want to first start with two budgeted items that we would like to request your reconsideration for. The first one is the fire department's request to purchase a pumper tanker, and the second item is county's recommendation to hire additional paid personnel. So we'll start with that first item. The original budget submission included a pumper tanker expenditure of $800,000. This capital purchase was declined by the county, and we'd like your reconsideration based on the following justification. The projected growth of the Bethel Fire Tax District over the next 10 years is significant. In fact, we anticipate at least 6,000 new homes and apartment buildings, with majority of that construction localized near Station 1. While all Bethel firefighters would use the pumper tanker as needed, the initial and the primary focus is to allow the daytime paid staff to remain together and respond in one vehicle for any emergency. This guarantees that our firefighters adhere to OSHA requirements of 2 firefighters in, 2 out at a structure fire, and 1 as incident command. The pumper tanker would also triple the amount of fire attack time before other water sources or mutual aid arrive on the scene. And this could mean the difference between saving property and lives and losing them. The pumper tanker would also carry majority of the equipment that is needed to assist in other situations, such as MVAs, medical assist, and other fire service calls. Having 3,000 gallons of water readily accessible helps to serve all in our district, with and without fire hydrants. And to illustrate this point, I'd like to turn your attention to a map of the district. If I could get one of our board members to hold that up, that would be great. I don't know about you, I'm a visual person, so I am going to speak while Peter shares this with you. If I could bring your attention to on your side, it would be the right side of this district, so I can illustrate a couple of points. So currently, Bethel Fire District covers 53 square miles and has 634 hydrants. I want you to ignore this road right here, that's Daimler Boulevard. There are 34 hydrants on there with no infrastructure surrounding it. So we're going to focus on those remaining 600 hydrants. So if these hydrants were equally distributed across those 53 square miles, that equates to a little bit less than 12 hydrants per square mile. Sounds pretty good. But as you can see, these hydrants are not equally distributed. And the point we want to make here is there are 2 to 3 heavily concentrated areas, and you can see those here. 1, 2, and then a couple here. So keep in mind a couple of other things for those that are hydranted. Each engine only carries 1,000 feet of 5-inch LDH, and that equates to less than 2/10 of a mile. And that's important because distance to the hydrant could be greater than 2/10 of a mile. And that's even in the more those areas that have the dense population of hydrants. So that would require additional time and resources to access those water supplies. I'd also like to stress that there is no impact to our taxpayers for this purchase. And it's important that we make these larger capital purchases sooner rather than later, because the yearly increase in fire apparatus costs is 5 to 7%. Again, we are simply requesting the approval to spend the money that Bethel has saved to purchase this pumper tanker as well as other capital expenditures. And the fund balance is currently at $1.4 million. The second item that I'd like to address is the county's adjustment to personnel expenditures. This is the second year in a row where county has increased the budgeted personnel expense with the expectation to hire more paid firefighters. If county's recommendation is adopted, Bethel's personnel budget will nearly double, and the millage rate will increase from 2.4 to 2.7, and this is all at the expense of the taxpayers in our district. Again, we ask that you reconsider this item for a few reasons. Based on the current call volume, and more importantly, the types of calls that we received, additional paid personnel is not needed at this time. And I'd like to call Captain Sawyers to share his perspective as a paid firefighter on this particular item. If I can get you up here, that'd be great. Let me increase this. Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Bethel Fire Department. My name's Chuck Sawyers. I've been in the fire service for 31 years before I moved down here, and I've been here 5 years now. I've been everything from a fireman to chief, back to fireman. 90% of those years been volunteer. I'm lucky enough to do the job I love and get paid to do the job I love. I'm here to speak on behalf of the pumper tanker, and the main reason I support the pumper tanker and this piece of equipment, I'd be able to keep my staff together while responding to calls. I wouldn't have to wait for a tanker to get to me, and that 2 guys on that tanker to get to me, which could be, depending on where they are, those vehicles don't move as fast as an engine does. So keeping those guys with me, I would be able to come off and perform my job as an engine crew. Get in, fight fire, not have to worry about water, gives my engineer a chance to establish a water supply, or the additional companies coming to me. And I don't want to throw rocks at other stations. Different times of the day, I get different levels of equipment, and I might not always get what I need, and I have to call for more additional resources. We serve a unique area, in my opinion, in my 5 years here. We have hydrants in certain areas, and we don't have hydrants in areas. And in some of those hydrants, I don't know what I'm going to get from it. It varies. So I can't always rely on those hydrants. But the main thing is keeping my crew together and knowing when we get there, I can start doing my job. They can start doing their job. And with this, I think it will provide us the resource that we need as a paid crew during the daytime to perform efficient. Like, no two fires are the same, no two fires burn the same, and no two districts are the same. So we have to shoot from the hip on each call. We use our training and our resources. And with that, I just think this pumper tanker would be a good resource for us. And that's all I have. Thank you.
I'll continue with that second item, if I may. Thank you. So this proposed tax increase does not provide the appropriate amount of time for the board to work with Councilwoman Love to provide those public forums that are so critical for taxpayers so that we can explain what this means to them, as well as provide the opportunity for them to voice their opinion, as well as either approval or concern. And we feel, as a board, that public opinion must be considered prior to making any decisions to raise taxes. Instead, we don't come empty-handed. We actually come with a viable alternative solution to paid firefighters. Bethel has committed to aggressive recruiting efforts for volunteers. And at this point, I'd like two of my fellow board members to come up and share their experiences with robust volunteer recruiting efforts. We'll first start with State Guard Dive Team, John Howard, and then a fast follow will be Peter Capicelli, who is a former volunteer firefighter in New York. John?
Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak today. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm with South Carolina State Guard. I know the South Carolina State Guard doesn't have a lot of presence in York County, but we are a statewide volunteer agency. We've got over 1,000 members. I want to talk a little bit about the volunteers and what they do and why they do it. I'm a volunteer in the State Guard. Nobody gets paid anything, nothing for our meals, our mileage to get where we go, but we drill, we do hurricane relief and emergency management throughout the state. We save the state, well, actually the State Guard put in 44,000 volunteer hours through the State Guard over the last couple years with the hurricanes that we did. So why do I bring that up? There's been an industry or a nationwide trend that indicates that volunteerism is going down in America. I want to counteract that by saying if we give an aggressive recruiting effort, as we've done in the State Guard, we can get volunteers in. People want to volunteer, want to be part of the community. That's why we're doing what we do on the tax board. That's why we have other volunteers throughout the nation and the state. So I'll give you an idea how we did this in the State Guard. We reduced our ranks all the way down to 250 people. It was over 1,500 back a few years ago. We wanted the right people that did the right job, that were qualified to do it. We built that up over in the past 3 years to over 1,000 people again within 3 years. So that's over 750 volunteers that are dedicated, trained to come in and do what they do. These are the same types of programs that we want to implement in with the Bethel Volunteer Fire Department, because it's people that are dedicated to do the job, they want to do it, and they're interested in serving their community. As a taxpayer, and I see me as part of this board as representing the taxpayers, we want to be able to save the money that we'll be able to do to buy this capital equipment, whatever we may be able to do for firefighting within the district. And I think before we hire a lot more paid staff, we can actually take this volunteer program that we do and save the county a lot of money on that. And then we know we're gonna have to have paid staff later, but let's delay that. Let us go through this process, get volunteers in, and then we can build on that as the community grows in the future. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. As a former volunteer firefighter and captain with 16 years prior fire department experience, 7 of those years as the recruitment chairman of that fire department, I can tell you that despite the trend of volunteerism being down nationwide, with an aggressive recruitment campaign, as we've mentioned earlier, we can increase volunteers within the Bethel Volunteer Fire Department. In my former fire department on Long Island, New York, I was able to increase the fire department's personnel roster from 93 to 135, despite living in one of the highest cost of living states in the nation. A place where there are 2-income families working 2 to 3 jobs to make ends meet, yet they still volunteer for their community. The community within the confines of the Bethel Fire District is expanding beyond anybody's expectations, with several more thousands of homes slated to be built within the next few years. This is not a retirement community, and the thousands of people coming to live in the area are of a younger generation. There is a lot of untapped talent in our town just waiting to be utilized. We intend to tap into that talent and bring them into the gratifying world of firefighting. In my experience, when neighbors are helping neighbors, working for pride rather than a paycheck, it always rises to the top. By implementing aggressive recruitment tactics, such as the implementation of fire prevention programs, social media campaigns, home mailings, and signage placed in key locations around the fire district, we can accomplish this goal. Thank you.
I promised I would be brief, and I'm going to deliver on that promise. So at this time, we'd like to entertain any questions that you have that pertain to those 2 items of requested pumper tanker and removal of additional paid personnel.
Are there any members of your tax board that disagree with your request?
There are none.
I have a few questions, and I'm probably going to jump around on these
Okay.
some, so I apologize. First is in speaking about keeping the crew together. That confuses me a little bit as far as how having this pumper tanker would allow you to keep the crew together. What do you mean by that?
I wouldn't have to drop one of my guys off the engine that we have now and put them on the tank. And doing that does away with my 2 million keeping out. Whereas if I had that initial 3,000 gallon of water, I would be able to keep the coming in, coming out, and have a water supply to people who need just a few more seconds.
And does Bethel, I apologize, I don't know all the equipment that everyone has, but does Bethel currently have any pumper tankers?
We do not.
None, okay. That clears up a little bit. I was a little confused with just that because I've never seen, my office is right around the corner from the York Fire Department, so I see York rolling to things all the time, and I've never seen them roll one piece of equipment. There's always multiple pieces of equipment that roll, so that kind of confused me when you said allowed to keep them together, because there's always at least 2 trucks that roll to everything that I've seen, sometimes 3 or 4. So there's multiple guys there if you have that many. So I guess the next thing, I'll save one question for later because I have a feeling someone else will probably answer, but what I've found, and I represent a district that is 100% volunteer in District 3, and our volunteers are extremely important to the county in what we do, but I have found that there are departments who have a lot of volunteers on the rolls, but that doesn't mean a whole lot if the volunteers don't show up. And in today's society, it's hard for some of those volunteers to show up during the day, especially when they work other jobs and that type of thing. That's what we're finding a lot. And so, I like the idea of recruitment, but I do think we're coming to a point in society to where we have to supplement those volunteers with more and more paid personnel. It's the way the society's going and the way things are going. We've got some volunteer. I asked this question recently when we had another fire chiefs in the room, and we're talking about budgets, and we had one department that has like 29 people on the roll, and they respond to 3 times as many as some of our departments that have 75 or 80 people on the roll. There's twice as many calls. So just having the volunteers doesn't make me as comfortable that we're still going to be able to get the right number of personnel there, because at certain times of the day, that's very hard with volunteers. So I'll leave it with those few comments and questions right now, and then there may be some more that come back up, but thank you.
Thank you.
I have 3 questions, and I'll blurt them out, and then anybody who can answer them, y'all can pick the one you want to answer. First one is, if you purchase the pumper tanker, do you anticipate selling the excess equipment? Second one is, will the size of the pumper tanker prevent it from being able to reach any areas of the community for which you're responsible for making calls? And the third one is, have you had enough people respond to calls, and have the calls been responded timely?
Great questions. I think I might have 1 to 2 folks who can help with that. So I'm going to call up Assistant Volunteer Chief Robinson to address those. And if you could repeat those first 2.
About the pumper tanker?
Yes, please.
Okay, the first one is, do you anticipate selling any excess equipment if you purchase this pumper tanker? Does it make any of the equipment?
Paul, can you come up to the microphone, please?
Anyway, the pumper tanker will be a custom cab that can carry 6 people. We currently run 4 to 5 paid staff during the day. And the idea of keeping them together is OSHA requires 2 firefighters in on a structure fire, 2 out. If we have to take the current engine and the tanker on a structure fire, you've effectively taken away 1 person, so the engine's responding with 4, have an incident commander, then you've got 3 firefighters. And by regulation, really can't go in if you need to go in. So we'll get past that. Last year we did, when we requested it last year, we did offer for our engine that's at Station 1 that's due to be changed out in the next few years. I don't know the schedule, but somewhere 3 to 4 years. We won't need that one again. So that would be the exchange that you're asking about, Christy. Which would save, I don't know what they're gonna run now, but probably $450,000, $500,000 savings to the county.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind too, we're looking at these capital expenditures as something that's gonna last us 20 to 25 years in the future. We're trying to build that so that in the next few years, as the call volume increase, we can address the personnel issues.
Will the size of the equipment be able to reach all the intended locations? Are there any places where it wouldn't be able to get to?
There are places that some of our equipment can't get to now because the physical size of trucks has gotten pretty big for all the equipment you have to carry. Now, if If I say something wrong, Don, you correct me. But this is basically the size of our newest truck with an extra axle and about 3 extra feet to the back. So it would be able to get about anywhere they need to get, yes.
My third one had to do with personnel. And so I guess the question is, have you had any trouble making it to the scene? Have you made it there with enough people, and have you made it there timely according to the requirements that you have?
I think we could, we can say yes. And as far as, oh gosh, got to put the glasses on, folks. Okay. As far as the timely manner, I have a report here. This is for this year. We printed it out. Average response time, dispatch to arrival, the average is 11 and a half minutes. Okay? That's from the time we receive the dispatch to the time the truck actually gets there. The average turnout time, that's the time from the time we get the dispatch until a truck goes en route, is 5 minutes. So that's taking the average from the daytime. They obviously get going quicker. When it's in the evenings and the volunteers, it does take a little bit longer because we don't always have somebody at the station. But we do have them that live close enough that within 4 to 5 minutes, the truck's rolling.
What is the current operating budget for Bethel?
Right in front of me. Is the operating budget prior to the changes that were made?
For the current fiscal year, what was that budget? I don't have those numbers before me anymore.
I'm pulling that up. Give me just one moment. I have a very large binder of a lot of information I've learned in the past 30 days. Okay. All right, so the requested operating budget without the expenditures, with expenditures, capital expenditures, and there are 2 that we are requesting, it would be 1.67 million.
1.6?
And that includes 2 capital expenditures. One would be the pumper tanker. The other one is the replacement of the service truck.
And how much is just quick, how much is the pumper and how much is the service truck?
The pumper tanker is $800,000, and if you'll give me just one moment, I'll tell you how much the 150, thank you, Don, I appreciate it, 150,000 for the service truck.
Mr. Chairman, the 2018-19 budget that was passed is $713,314. Kevin, Mr. Madden over there can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was, to answer that question, so yes, ma'am, or yes, sir, she's right. The requested budget this year is 1.6 and some change, and that included the Service 8 replacement and the pumper tanker. But the budget that was passed last year, 18-19 fiscal year, 713,314.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that.
What is, and this question's for Kevin Madden, what's a 0.3 mil increase? What's that in Bethel? I mean, what is that number? I don't.
Running about $85,000, and it's going to be about $1.20 for every $100,000 owner-occupied house.
So it's $1.20
for every $100,000 of owner-occupied house.
Is that a year or a month?
A year.
All right. And forgive me, I've lost track of who has said what the entire time. One of the gentlemen made the comment that he doesn't always get the level of service he needs during certain parts of the day, and he didn't want to throw anybody under the bus. I'm not asking you to throw anybody on the bus. I'm just curious why you don't get the level of service during the day.
One department that assists us is all volunteer. They're working on hiring 2 take firefighters. This is closing. And the next department will be door, and 3 departments out of North Carolina. Monroe, Evo, and Skipper. I don't always know what I'm getting from those departments, so our personnel work with.
And I understand your argument for a pumper truck is that you've got a growing population, you want to be able to keep everybody together. But then somebody's made a comment that there already is an engine and there's already a pumper. Am I correct when I say that? Okay, so if you go to this larger 3,000 tank, you're only going to roll one truck. You're not going to roll two. All right. And my last real question is, if the county's recommendation to hire an additional 2 full-time firefighters was accepted, when would they work? Night or day? The 2 new full-time firefighters that the county has recommended, when would they work? During the night or during the day?
If it's like what they said last year, they wanted us to hire 2 more full-time people. We had our daytime crew up and put some people in all 3 of our stations. Which means you roll trucks from 3 different stations. That means you got 3 drivers tied up where you don't have a firefighter. I guess we're unique in the way we operate. We realized back when we created the tax system, or before we created it, that we didn't have the volunteers during daytime hours. We went away from a cotton mill setting, working 3 shifts and whatnot. Our volunteers are working during the day, like everybody said, they're not there. So we hired some paid people once we created the tax district, and they work Monday through Friday from 7:30 to 5:30. There's 4 of them full-time. You keep those 4 together, we work 1 part-time guy, if we can get him, and most days we do, that's 5 people. So you can have an IC/engineer on scene, and you have your 2 firefighters in and 2 firefighters out. You know, somebody gets hurt, they get down, you need to get in, you got people to go. If we have to take those people and spin them up and put them in another truck, then taken away from that working environment, and that's what Captain Sawyer was talking about. They wanted us to put 2 people at Station 2, 2 people at Station 3, and leave 3 people at Station 1. But nobody had a full crew. Whoever got on scene first, we couldn't do anything other than maybe an exterior tack possibly you can deck them to the construction site. I'm assuming with what they want us to do this year would be the same thing. And I just, my opinion, and I think the tax board's opinion too, is, you know, that's, at this point in time, with the way we operate, we're getting our calls, we're getting to our calls, we're doing the job we need to do. That would be a waste of the taxpayers' money at this time. Now, eventually, yes, we're gonna get to that point. As we grow and all these departments do, we're gonna have to put on more paid people. There's no doubt about it, but it's not today. It's not next week. I mean, we run about 900 calls a year, and probably at least 50% of those are wrecks and EMS. Wrecks cover a big portion. And, you know, you don't need all that stuff up and down the road. The way I look at it, the less emergency vehicle you put out there with the red lights and sirens, it keeps from scaring the people, making drastic moves, driving, making possible cause a wreck. You're better off y'all. They even told us several years ago, we're going to EMS assist. Don't worry about running big trucks. Take the trash truck on the small one. You don't upset the traffic flow. So we have to be cautious of the pedestrians and the people out there as we drive. So, you know, the smaller truck we get to an EMS assist better. That came through the communication committee. This, you know, we can take 1 truck and do what we need to do. And it keeps our men together the way we operate, so we can do the job we need to do and do it in a safe manner.
Well, this will be my last question. Would you not have full-time firefighters at night or do you only want to operate as volunteers at night?
In the future, we're gonna have to, I think, but we've got to do some modifications. We only have one building, we have 3 stations, and one building has sleeping quarters. When you go to that type of service, you would either have to quadruple your manpower, work 8-hour shifts, or we're gonna have to modify our buildings to have sleeping quarters, but we don't have any sleeping quarters in anything except for the last station, our number 1 station, main station.
Where are the full-time, current daytime full firefighters at? Are they out of Station 1?
Station 1 that is sort of centralized in our district, and most of the wrecks and stuff that happen to go to in that area.
I'll just,
We also, that area also covers places that don't have the hydrants, you gotta get water involved.
I'll say this, and just, this is for $3.60 a year, which, and I'm just estimating on a $300,000 house. For $3.60 a year, I'd want paid firefighter at night, because y'all have admitted that you have a slower, little slower, it's not much, but a little slower return at night. It just seems to me, I understand, and I applaud you for what you're trying to do to get more volunteers. You need more volunteers. The whole county needs more volunteers. The system needs more volunteers. But you're growing so rapidly for the same argument that you're using that you need a pumper truck, your growing population. It would seem to me that is the exact same argument why you need some paid employees. I got to quit hogging time, Dr. Blackwell.
Johnson asked some questions I was going to ask, but I want to thank you again. I really have tremendous respect for the, of course, law enforcement and the firemen for all you do, and thank God you're there. Sorry. But, you know, of course, I'm trying to analyze this from a very objective viewpoint. And obviously, you're involved. I get the analysis. But am I right in remembering, do I remember correctly, the old fire tax board said, no, you don't need it? The one before it was dissolved? Okay, so I guess that they did say no. And then, of course, then the administration took over, and Bill Shanahan, who's very conscientious and tries to be as fair as he can be to anybody, he said no. And then I understand the ISO analysis said you didn't need it. So those are the hurdles that I'm looking at. So you have neutral parties, and you have Bill Shanahan, who tries to be very objective and analytical about numbers, and they all said no. And I think you were saying it's much more efficient to have one response truck. I guess it's a hybrid with the tanker and everything needed on it versus having 2 and you pull a man off. Although I kind of wonder in my head and my limited knowledge that if you had an extra person that would make up for that. But anyway, I'm going to think this through carefully, but those are kind of some of the points I went through. Not to mention Friday, we pointed out a big problem we have is trying to get volunteers right now. That's a tremendous problem and kind of a motivation for trying to go to hired firemen to get more men on the job.
Well, I certainly want to applaud everyone who volunteers their time, because this is one of those things that when general population lay their heads down at night, they're not thinking about who's going to protect their home if something's happened on fire, or I'm sure you guys probably respond to some many other things that go on in the community outside of fire. So I definitely appreciate the service on that level. And I was just making all kind of notes. I got my paper littered with stuff, and the last 2 from Sabrina to now you, it's been really informative and real educational. And I know I met with Allison earlier last week, and we were talking about some things, and I'm starting to get more involved with the fire protection in my district, because we're looking at possibly moving the fire department, so I'm starting to hear from more firefighters, and so I'm more conscientious about what goes on and how we're protected by the fire service. I share some of the same concerns as Michael does when it comes to the increase in property taxes that we may be looking at doing to do a paid position. Also, I can hear and see some of the concerns or the need for the pumper tanker. I know when I met with Allison, she was saying how she explained the 2 in, 2 out, and one person with the tanker, and so I get that, and I understand keeping the crew together versus taking 2 trucks and you got all this equipment and wanting to have a piece of equipment that says this serves everything that we need versus trying to piecemeal the protection that we're going to need to fight the fire or do what we have to do at the scene. Just hearing some of the conversation, I'm thinking, why not do both? For such a marginal increase in taxes, the $1.20, and if you average out at a $300,000 home, you're looking at $3. And I don't think the community would be in an uproar in that area knowing that, hey, we're better prepared if something happens. Just like insurance, it's best to have it and don't need it and not have it. So I think if we're concerned about what it's going to do to the taxing situation or people getting upset, I think this will be an easy sale to the community if anyone's concerned about their property taxes. And I've said it many times before, when it comes to what we charge in property taxes here in York County, and then staff probably heard me say, we give it away compared to what some other areas charge for property taxes and what people get for that dollar. So I'm looking to hear from staff and you all, why not consider doing both? And I know some firefighters and fire districts in different areas are getting overwhelmingly concerned about, hey, York County is moving towards paid firefighters, which kind of maybe takes some control away from the chiefs and some other aspects. But we've heard it tonight how difficult it is to get volunteers, especially during daytime hours. Obviously, this is a working community. We're not like the beaches in Florida where everybody moves there just to retire. We have people that move here and they're still working. I remember some years ago, everybody knows I work out at was once Bowater, Abitibi, Resolute, now we go by New Indy. We used to allow volunteer firefighters, if they got a call and they were on the job at Bowater, the old Bowater, they got to go. Our management, our company mission motto was, hey, if you're volunteering in this community and this is what you're doing, we had people that would leave the job and go fight fires for the community. And I think that speaks volume to where we were to now companies probably don't value that good corporate citizenship in the community where they're making their employees available to do these type services. So it doesn't surprise me that we're starting to look at ways to compensate from what once was companies allowing people to leave the job to now they're not able to leave the job. So how do we replace that? And I think we have to start thinking of those ways. How do we replace that volunteer that used to be able to leave his job with someone during the daytime or even nighttime? So I hear the concerns of, do we really want to go paid? We can't go paid all the way across the county because that will have a tremendous tax impact across the board. But in situations like this one here, and it's only going to cost $1.20, I want to kind of keep the conversation going about, hey, let's look at doing both. Let's don't pick one over the other, because if we need a pumper tanker, we need a pumper tanker. If we need bodies and manpower, we need bodies and manpower. So I think the conversation now probably needs to shift to, hey, let's look at doing both. Let's don't fight amongst the two. When I feel like we can have a cake and eat it too in that scenario. In that way, the chief's prepared, the staff is prepared, the crew's ready to handle business when they get there, and let's don't be so apprehensive to looking at some paid options with the fire protection, because 10, 15 years from now, it may be paid across the board. I don't think we're there yet. I still think that's a ways off. I don't want anybody to get concerned that this is the way we're going, but in certain areas, certain peak times of the day, if we need bodies, we need to put some paid people on staff. So I like to keep the conversation open to considering to do both, the pumper tanker and the possible paid position.
obviously don't have any questions. I would like to pass down to all of my fellow council members. These are two messages that I've received from Representative Tommy Pope and from Representative Bruce Bryant in support of the fire department being able to, because they've been, they've seen the history of this fire department in particular, and it's just their comments on how frugal they've been with their budgets, and that they believe that they are in the best position to assess departmental needs and how to most effectively provide fire service to the community. So I'll pass these down to you. And I just want to take a little poll real quick of my fellow council members. I'd like to ask 2 questions, and I'd like for you to answer the questions, not just look at me. Question number 1 is, what percentage do you believe York County is volunteer versus career firefighters? Do you know what that number is?
8%?
8%?
80.
80%?
Volunteers?
I think it might even be a little higher percentage volunteers to pay.
95.
So question number 2 is, do you know what the average age of a volunteer firefighter is in York County? 38.
40?
56.
Question number 3 is, have you read the 10-year fire study? Because it's disappointing to me if you haven't. Very disappointing. So I've made some notes because I don't want to get off track. First, allow me to say that I believe that everyone in this room has the best interest of our taxpayers in mind. When I first got on council, I was told by the county manager that public safety is the #1 goal. I have no reason to doubt that. Let me clarify that my use of the word "we" relates either to Bethel Volunteer Fire Department, of which I am an honorary member and have been, didn't just become one, or to the taxpayers within the Bethel Fire Tax District, which also includes me. I want to impress upon everyone here tonight that what I'm about to say is not intended to personally, as a personal attack on anyone. We've been put in an awkward position of having to justify our requested budget items, and that is my only intent. Without any communication with our current fire tax board, other than their face-to-face meeting with Amanda to deliver the requested budget, county management has drastically changed what was requested in the budget and are suggesting a millage rate increase to all but include a paid chief in their recommended budget. Management has denied a pumper tanker that has been planned for financially by the fire department for years. Council's not approving this apparatus for 3 years has resulted in a big cost increase and delays as delivery is about a year from ordering. We, Bethel Volunteer Fire Department, and the tax board, on behalf of the taxpayers who have already funded the pumper tanker, are requesting we be able to make this purchase with monies currently on hand. There is no reason to raise taxes at this time. And Michael, that's the first time I've heard anybody say, just a little bit isn't gonna hurt. It's just a little bit. How much was yours? How much was that gonna raise? Was that just a little bit too, Sabrina? One alternative use of funds on hand suggested to the fire department by the county manager while acting as our previous tax board was to pay off the $900,000 balance on the fire station. This would entail eliminating a loan at a 1.8% interest rate, depleting the funds on hand, and ultimately purchasing needed apparatus at a 7 or 8% interest rate. Robert, you know that's not probably a good move, right? You're our financial guy. This was not a good financial plan, and frankly, it does nothing in the name of public safety. The pumper tanker is warranted, and as you've heard tonight, it allows our firefighters to arrive on scene with enough water to effectively fight structure fires. I want to clarify, because I'm not sure that this is very clear, but when one of our firemen arrives on a scene and they're in engine 1, let's say, they arrive on scene and they've got 2 people in that engine. One person has to remain with the truck at all times. The second truck comes in, one person has to remain with that truck. What this pumper tanker does, it is a custom cab. It is not like any pumper anywhere else in the county. It is a custom cab that will allow 5, 6, or 7 people to arrive on scene at the same time, and we have one person manning a truck rather than 2. So as the example of the day shift and what Chuck was saying, is that all 5 of our guys can arrive on a scene. They've got 3,500 gallons of water, so if they're out somewhere where there's not a hydrant, which is more than likely where they're going to be, and they have 1 person manning the truck, and they have 4 firemen, 2 in and 2 out. We are in a much better position to fight a fire. For each apparatus we take to a scene, we lose 1 firefighter to manning the apparatus. The example of this was shown, and it's the #1 reason we have asked for a custom cab to hold as many people as possible. There are no pumpers similar to this in the county, and comparisons to other pumpers are invalid. More available personnel and more available water is the ultimate goal. We are at most 60% hydranted, and there is not a way to get water from the 60% to the 40% that don't have hydrants. To minimize that risk factor is irresponsible. ISO credited Bethel with 26.16 out of 40 points due to a lack of hydrantage/water supply. That's a big hit, just simply because we don't have hydrants. So we can minimize it and say that that's not a big deal, but ISO thinks that's a big deal too. County management and staff have stated they have spoken to experts regarding Bethel. I requested the email conversations and said experts' names. Names were removed from the emails shared with me. Should a council member have to do a FOIA request? The current Bethel Volunteer Fire Tax Board has been crafted to deal with situations such as this. The board members have put over 30 hours into being up to speed and understanding all aspects of the Bethel Tax District. The needs of the taxpayers they represent and the needs of the fire department are a priority. They are accountable to the taxpayers to oversee how their tax dollars are used. The intent of Bethel Volunteer Fire Department is to attract, train, and retain volunteers. This saves tax dollars and increases personnel, which we all agree is needed. The most current ISO report is from December 2015, and personnel is recommended. Nowhere does it recommend paid personnel. We feel that with the right campaign, we can be the volunteer model for York County. We have career firefighters currently covering our daytime hours. The combination of paid and volunteer firefighters is a must in York County. We do not refute that. Tax Board member Peter Capicelli is a former New York volunteer who was charged with recruitment and succeeded at attaining and retaining many volunteers in his all-volunteer department. He is an asset to our tax district. He has 18 years in fire service and a mindset that values volunteers. He is an expert. As you can see, we are the only fire department here tonight. I believe this paints a picture that somehow our fire chief, a veteran of the fire department for 52 years, is being questioned as to what he believes his department needs. Chief Love is the most frugal person I know. Tight is a better word for it. He searches out used vehicles and personally drives the distance to get them. I can tell you firsthand that he is extremely knowledgeable about fire service, and when he asks for something, which he rarely does, it is needed. He and I are not related, but we both have in common love. Love for the community and for our fire department. We also have in common accountability. Excuse me one second. Should have brought the tequila. We have also in common accountability to all taxpayers in the Bethel District for their safety and for the value and benefit they receive for their tax dollars. With over half a century of fire experience and leadership as a chief, Don Love is an expert. Amanda Foster is a diamond in the rough. I've watched her grow in the past 2 years. I believe she is an asset to York County. She is well-versed in fire service, and her interest and dedication is obvious. She has the confidence to make recommendations, and that trait is a rare and valuable one. Although she has an important role in fire service for the county, she is not yet an expert. York County paid $60,000 for a 10-year fire study that has yet to be adopted by County Council. If you remember, it was me who asked that this subject be added to our strategic plan. I have read the study from front to back, a couple times actually. I'm very involved and know more than I would ever have thought I need to know about fire service. I am not an expert. The 10-year study was completed a year ago, May, and Chapter 5 has yet to be mentioned by management. This is likely the most important chapter as it addresses volunteer retention. York County Fire Service is 74% volunteer. There's the answer to one of your questions. The majority of county firefighters are in their 30s, not over 60, as was portrayed by the county manager in our strategic meeting last month. These firefighters are able to run into burning buildings, and they do. The median age at Bethel is 36. Management cites training issues. However, the study and the fire chiefs unanimously recommended a full-time training officer, and a part-time person was hired instead. There is no plan for recruiting volunteers, and there is no goal for retaining those we currently have. I believe a county-run paid fire service is the agenda of York County management, and disenchanting volunteers and volunteer chiefs is the quickest way to get there. Usurping the authority of a volunteer, or any chief for that matter, and discounting what has been asked for on behalf of the citizens served is not only disrespectful, but it gives a glimpse into an existing culture. A culture that is a self-fulfilling prophecy of extremely higher taxes countywide as we lose an increasingly unappreciated and neglected volunteer base. 74% of our firefighters deserve better from York County. I attended the Justice and Public Safety Committee meeting last Friday. It would appear from the discussion that management and staff is about to do this or working on that. However, the study has been completed for over a year. We are still hearing from fire chiefs that put their concerns in writing almost a year ago. The fact that most of council, by no fault of our own, is not well-versed in fire service is a liability to our taxpayers countywide. It simply means, for the most part, we trust what is recommended. In this case, the recommendations will have a negative impact on taxpayers. Bethel cannot wait any longer for York County to assess apparatus, review now 2-year-old information, and not address the loss of volunteers countywide without a goal in mind to retain them. We are aware of the changes in volunteerism nationwide, and we have already begun discussions to address this at Bethel. Might I quote Robert Redford? "Problems become opportunities when the right people come together." York County Animal Control is an example of this. When our new leadership arrived on the scene at Animal Control, there were about 15 active volunteers. 9 months later, there are now about 50. I've pointed out people in this room tonight who are experts. They are most familiar with the community Bethel has served for 52 years, the history of the call type Bethel receives, personnel evaluation, and the timeline for future apparatus needs. No hidden names or mystery advice. You have heard from several of them: Tax Board member Peter Capicelli, Tax Board member and Bethel volunteer Joe Costello, paid Captain Chuck Sawyers, Assistant Volunteer Chief Paul Robinson, and Volunteer Chief Don Love. With a combined 139 years of experience, these folks are also taxpayers within the Bethel Fire Tax District. To my knowledge, there are no other experts in this room, and certainly none with the needed knowledge specific to Bethel to make budget recommendations of this magnitude. Even the recommended budget fails to include the cost of increased workman's comp due to the addition of paid personnel, another oversight. That is estimated to require approximately $11,000 more be added to management's recommendation. It's unfortunate the people who have spoken on behalf of the fire department and the tax district tonight are being heard for the first time. There is a need and a plan reflected in the requested Bethel budget. There is the will to be the example of what fire service can accomplish with volunteers and career firefighters working in unison in York County. The Fire Tax Board and I are asking that on behalf of the taxpayers in the Bethel Fire Tax District, Council approve the budget for Bethel Volunteer Fire Department as requested. Thank you.
Yes, if I could, just a couple of questions that came up. One, I'd just be interested to know the, not tonight, but the average age of the volunteers instead, or the firefighters instead of the median. That tells you a lot of difference.
I'll give you a graph. I'll give you a graph of that.
Median is a lot different number than the average, and so.
We have some guys that are in their 80s that are on our roster. They actually began the department 52 years ago.
And a lot of the fire departments do.
Yeah, so that sways those numbers, but I can give you a graph of that.
And also, just curiosity, because times have changed and the areas are different, but thank you for what you did. And I know Amanda and management have been we've been talking about looking at ways to increase volunteerism. So hopefully you've got that knowledge. Hopefully we'll reach out to you and try to work on that across the entire county, which is something we've been talking about. But as again, a question, you're retired now, I believe you said, from up there. How long ago were you in the Long Island Fire Department and Fire Services and doing that particular job?
I started in the fire service in 2002, January 2002.
Peter, will you come up to the microphone, because this is being recorded and we can't hear you.
I started in the fire service January 2002, and I moved down here in August 2016, but I was an active member until the end of 2016. I actually I was doing recruitment efforts while living here for my old department, because I was still active on the rolls, and that was my position. And I did that from 2009 until the end of 2016. Okay. And I would fly back home. I would make arrangements with people. I would fly back to New York. I would compile all the applications, check everything, pass on to the next, and then I would take a weekend, and then I would fly back.
Okay. Thank you.
But I did that for 7 years, from 2009 to 2016.
I know y'all have been talking about it. County's been talking about it. I think we should maybe get together and see what we can do together on that situation. And the last thing I'd like to clarify again, because one question I had was, are there other pumper takers in the county anywhere? But Allison pretty much answered, there's at least none like this, apparently. There may be others, and I don't know if there are, but there's 2 others in the county, but not like this, so, okay.
The other ones only carry 2 people.
Okay. And I'd just like clarification, I guess, from the chief, that this will eliminate, at least in most situations, the need to roll a second vehicle, because that's one of the selling points you're giving us. But if you still roll a second vehicle, then that defeats the whole purpose of spending the $800,000 and doing the custom cab. You got to pull a second person off to do that second vehicle anyway, so.
Don, you're going to need to come to the microphone. And be brief.
You would have to look at each call you went to. I mean, we go to structure fires, and their room and contents, and it's taken care of. You don't even need your mutual aid. You turn them around before they even get there. Because the standard policy in York County is at least 2 departments. If it's a structure fire or fire alarm or CO alarm, it's at least 2 departments. And then you can get to one, like we had the other week, you're there for 6 or 7 hours. Yeah, you might need that other piece of equipment just because of where it is and what it is. And I can't say that it won't. It will 100% eliminate rolling that second truck. Well, I would say third. Because normally we roll that, the next thing that rolls out of our station is a service truck, which has got to, where we can refill our SCBA cylinders and that kind of stuff. So you're going to have 2 on the road. Anyway, it might stop that third one. You know, but I can't say 100% that it's going to get rid of it. I do want to say that while I'm here, we looked at this back when this tax district was formed and organized in 2009, and we started putting money back at $110,000 a year, knowing that York County had furnished us greatly. We got good equipment and all, but we owned some ourselves. And, you know, we realized that as we grew with what was happening around the lake, the county has given us pretty much all they can. So this truck is in addition to what the county has supplied us. And we realized that in 2009 when the tax district was formed. We started saving that money then. We were putting it back for this purpose. The money's there. We can buy this truck, pay for it, and won't increase taxes at all, period, and still have money left in the fund balance. And I guess being tight or whatever is what we looked at back then. Now, I did make the offer last year trying to get this truck that at Station 1, our engine 1 is a county truck. It's bought by the county, through the county system. I made the offer at that time that, you know, in the 2 or 3 years, it's about 3 years off, I think, when it comes time to replace that truck, don't replace it, because this truck will take its place. And then this truck is at no cost to y'all, York County, out of the fire fund, general fund, wherever the money comes for the trucks. This is coming from the monies we've already collected through the tax district. I mean, it's not gonna affect our budget. Now, the total budget you see that we presented shows that, because you have to show you're spending that money when you take out a fund balance.
Yeah.
If you back that off, you'll look at and see, I think it's like 748,000 is what our budget is without those two big capital expenditures.
And I believe you said, management recommended a little different structure for the paid firefighters last year, but you have them all in one.
I don't.
And so that tells me from what you said that basically Station 1 and the paid firefighters roll to any call anywhere in Bethel, correct? Okay.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, even on the MVA, we go to MVA using an engine in case there's a fire and a service truck, because it's got extrication equipment and cribbing and shoring and all that if you got to do that to get the person out. So there's pretty much two trucks roll on everything. So, this truck is basically an engine with an extra axle on it and 3,000 gallons of water instead of 1,000 gallons. And it's encompassed in the same specs that the trucks were bought with year before last. Basically took that same truck. It's a little bit longer, got a second axle on it. It's no taller, no wider, nothing else. It's just got a tandem axle on the rear.
Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions? Thank you all. Thank you all. We're going to do a discussion.
This has been bugging me a little bit. How many of these fire hydrants have been flow tested? Can we get a number, a percentage of how these fire hydrants are maintained or tested for water?
Andy, are they supposed to be tested once how often are they supposed to be tested?
They are tested, and we can give you the results of those tests. Yes, sir.
So,
The frequency, et cetera. Amanda, am I speaking out of turn here? That's correct. That's part of the ISO. It's part of one of the services that the Department of Fire Safety provides is the flow testing of these hydrants, which helps maintain the points you get on the ISO side for flow testing.
Can we check that? Because I think,
that would be my concern.
I think they haven't been
Fire
tested
hydrant
since
that goes up to doesn't
2017,
work.
July of
Doesn't
2017.
that justify having a pump or tanker there?
We can verify those numbers.
Yeah, thank you.
That I would like to know.
Thank you. All right, we're going to have a discussion regarding the public hearing process for rezonings. Anyone? Come on up, sorry.
I'm sure we have questions for that. We talked about this at the last zoning committee meeting, talk about changing our policy for that, and our procedure, and we're told to bring it forward to council for the next meeting.
Okay.
So we're looking to go back to where we go to public, the planning commission first, at that first reading, or first item, and then it goes to public hearing and first reading, and then second reading and third reading. We were having some issues about having the public hearing as the first item out the door and not getting enough folks out there to actually hear about it. And so we feel if we go ahead and go back to planning commission first, that will then begin the momentum to begin getting public notice out and getting folks aware of what's going on.
I'll clarify. I'll put it on the agenda for the last zoning committee meeting. And so what David Hudspeth and I had discussed this, so one of the issues was that we were having the public hearing at council before anything else was being done. So people were showing up for a public hearing and didn't really know, they hadn't really been shown even what the public hearing was about, what the plan was. They just knew there was something maybe coming next to them, or, they gotten a letter in the mail, so they weren't really aware of that. So, and then we talked about, when the planning commission is looking at a rezoning or something, they need to look at it just from the planning aspect, not with the public input and that sort of thing. So in talking about it with the zoning committee, what we came up with that might be a better, just a better format is for it to go through the planning commission first, and then council would get their recommendation at a first reading. The public hearing would also be held at the first reading, and then it would move to a second and third reading. But the people would come here and at that public hearing, if it's something that needed to be presented, the staff would present basically the same thing to us that they do to the planning commission, so that people here understood. If you have an audience of people and you're doing a rezoning, a lot of times people are like, what are you even talking about? Last month we had somebody get up and talk in a whole different time frame because they just weren't aware. So I think it just gives a little bit more time for the public, and I feel like that when you weigh what the planning commission should hear basically is from the developer. If they've got questions for the developer, then they should be able to ask those questions. And I think because we are the elected officials, the public input should come before us. So what we had was people going to the planning commission and not being able to speak. And I think we can eliminate that trip for those folks if they just know they can come here, and we're gonna all hear from them on a rezoning at that first reading.
So essentially what we're doing is just changing from the old way, second reading, to the first reading.
The old way, we had that public hearing at second reading, so we would have public hearing at first reading.
Everybody understand that? It's gonna go planning commission, vote, public hearing and a vote, second reading vote, third reading vote. That's the quick
I do want to say,
30-second summary.
We had lengthy discussion about this at the zoning committee meeting, and I have a little bit of concerns about the whole purpose in changing it, and staff made the recommendation that we do it the way we've been doing it a year ago, and so now we're changing it again. The purpose that I understood we were changing it for was because the public was concerned that they were not getting, basically we bounced around public hearing date. You never knew if it was going to be first, second, or sometimes even third. But I think the concern was that the public felt like that they weren't given an opportunity to fully be heard, and they felt like the decision was made, recommendations were made before they even had a chance to provide input. Staff obviously feels very strongly about pushing it back to this old way of doing things, and I guess, I'm not opposed to that, except I will say this. I know that Chairman Blackwell made this comment, and I've not ever checked in to see how the city does this, but I would be in favor of requiring the applicant to do what I understand the city of Rock Hill does, which is to send out a notice to the folks who are required to get public notice, and let's require them to show that they have met with those folks and at least proposed what they're doing, so that the public is made aware of that, and it's not a requirement on staff to do that. I kind of like that idea. So, I mean,
I think the big problem is if we're kind of essentially just going back to the old way, but moving the public hearing to the first reading, we're kind of in the same mess that we kind of drifted toward the past year, where, they have the first reading and the public hearing, and then after that, it's in the paper, and they hear about it, and then, well, wait a minute, I didn't get a chance to speak, and now they can't speak. Versus, if we're going to go this route, I think it's more fair to be transparent to the public, to have it at second reading, so the official first reading's done. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. And we say, oh, sorry, that was first reading. Can't open your mouth now. But it'd be better to do it at second reading and maybe add in the fact when the developers come to you or whoever, you say, well, look, now here's your neighborhood list. Go see those people and knock on those doors, have a meeting, whatever you do. There's nothing more transparent than that. And then that gives them time to kind of see things over, and the planning department gets it. They, they get it and they make their decision. Then we have first reading, it's really percolating, and then they've been told, and then they can come at the second reading and not say we haven't been transparent, and not say we're given an opportunity. And I think we're kind of going around the edges of what everybody was fussing about. When, to me, I just kind of want to add a little common sense.
Well, as long as we're talking about transparency, then I think we should also stop putting rezonings in the consent agenda. I think the way it's been done, we've had a public hearing, and the next time it comes up, it's in consent agenda. And I'm not comfortable with the fact that people like y'all, that maybe they even know that we even had a public hearing. So, maybe it doesn't just affect the people that are adjacent to the property, it affects people that are having to drive past it and trying to get through that traffic on a daily basis. So my concern with it being at the second reading is that there's not a lot of time between the second reading and the third reading. After we've heard from the people, there's not a lot of time for us as the elected officials to try and resolve any issues that may come up. That gives us basically 2 weeks at the least, or, to work on
That's a good point, but we could always defer it one more
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah.
I mean, that way we're siding on the side of transparency and meeting, I agree with that comment.
Yeah.
I have a little different take on it, and you're probably not going to like my idea, but I think just because of the fact that when we publish the public hearing, nobody knows what the heck it's about till they show up to the public hearing anyway. I don't care when we publish it or when we have it the first reading or the 12th reading if we had one. They don't know till they show up because there's nothing in that really that says, other than it says your neighbor's wanting to rezone some property for something, come find out what it is. And most of the time, people either don't get it in the mail, don't see it, it goes in with all the 42 pounds of junk mail we get every month or whatever. And so, for me personally, I think they should be able to speak at the planning commission and they should be able to speak to us in a public hearing. Yeah. And so if that means it costs us a little more to do 2 mail-ins, I say increase the application fee a little bit. And instead of cutting back and saying you can't have one or you can't have the other, when the developer is making their presentation, most of the time is at that planning commission meeting.
Actually, they're not making presentations at the planning commission meetings anymore. The developers are now there simply to answer questions for the planning commission. The chair changed that, so.
I was gonna say, that's changed since the last one I attended.
Yeah, that changed last month, and the reason for that was because they were able to come and in other words, when we had the pitch from the last developer that was here, and they thanked me for helping them with, putting 30 feet between the homes, and they said they had, 35 people show up and were unanimously for that. Nobody could say anything, and then I knew they were going to go to the planning commission and say that same thing, and so that was a big concern of mine, and because the people historically have not been able to speak at a planning commission. So as far as I'm concerned, that's a defunct idea because they're not allowed to speak. And to allow them to speak, the planning commission really doesn't want to hear from them, and they shouldn't have to because they are simply looking at things from a planning perspective. So the playing field has been leveled now at the planning commission because the developers and their attorneys are simply there to answer questions of the planning commission.
And I would like to say on that point, I don't remember the full council discussing or addressing any changes at the planning commission.
The planning chair can make that change. The planning commission chair can make that change.
That's a pretty big change, so I would think that would be something council would at least be informed of and be involved with that type of thing.
Well, the former chair and the chairs prior have been able to say that the developers and their attorneys can speak, but the public can't. So that was even.
And again, my thought is everybody could speak, so it's important.
Let's do this. One, my question is this. Does the ordinance that enables the planning commission to exist, does it allow us to set their agenda from a standpoint of who speaks and who doesn't speak? We can take it away from these chairs. So it's in their bylaws.
Bylaws, it says the planning commission or the planning commission chair has the right to have who can speak and who cannot speak.
Okay. So do we have the authority to amend that?
Don't believe so, Michael. Who would amend the bylaws? I think the planning commission does that.
All right,
Yeah,
well, that's their
the planning
rule.
commission amends their own bylaws.
And that is a their rule problem. So that, although I do agree with you, we should all know when they change their rules, we should all be notified that they're changing their rules. I like Britt's idea to have public hearing at second, because I don't like first, because I think nobody knows what's going on. I do agree with that. I struggle with, I do think, though, if you're going to do it at second, what we have to do is then we ought to take an automatic one meeting off before third. So you have a second, let's say you did second public hearing in the first meeting in April, you wouldn't actually have third reading until the first meeting in May. it would automatically skip that second meeting. And by doing that, it'd give our public 30 days to give us the input that we need, builds in some time. I really like this idea of having people come before the planning commission. Problem is, people just walked in and half of it was, they were here on a fact-finding mission. They didn't know why they were here. There was a sign out front that said it was being rezoned, and nobody could come up with really why it was happening. I'd like to, so if we can change that and more information we can pump out,
A couple of
We're
times a
better
year,
off.
you would have a long delay. If that second reading fell July, August, when we were only meeting once, you would have basically almost a 5 week, you would have a very long wait for that third reading if it fell in July or August.
they would know that when they're applying, I would imagine. I mean, that's,
I agree with Christie, and I have some concerns, at least I think it's what I heard her saying, that by second reading, a lot of times the public thinks, well, they've already voted for it twice, why should we bother coming and speaking against it at this point? You know, the council's already supporting it, it's just a rubber stamp on the third time at this point. When have we, in the 4 years I've been up here, how often have we gotten to the third reading and gone, oh, well, nope, never mind, changed my mind. I voted for it the last 2 times, but no, we're gonna change it now. Doesn't happen very often, so I like it earlier in the process myself, but.
I would be in favor of a public hearing on second only if there's a requirement prior to planning commission that required the applicant to meet with and to provide proof that they sent notices and held a public meeting, which is no different than what I understand the city of Rock Hill does. That way, they have met with the folks and they've started the dialogue, and that's not put any burden on staff. It has merely put the burden on the applicant to send the notice out and to give information to these folks in a setting where they can ask questions of them directly.
That's not a problem, is it? I mean, as far as staff to give them the,
It would be fine for probably about 25% of our rezonings that actually could get contentious. At least 75%, lately at least, have been very simple rezonings where they're subdividing to, for their parcels and that's it. So I wouldn't want to have to hold up someone who's just trying to get an RUD to subdivide it in half, an extra reading, an extra moment to meet with the people. So I think it would be upon staff to recognize which ones are more important, that would probably have some issues where they probably should meet with the neighborhood. And I think a lot of times that's how Rock Hill does it as well, is they recognize which ones are the issues.
a little common
Those
sense.
would be the ones we would have a community.
No, that's logical.
all right. Obviously, we will, Joel, you want to chime in with anything?
All I'll say is, I haven't been here long enough to have the benefit of observing the prior arrangement. In my short experience with how it is currently, I do think there's a need for change. I like the ongoing discussion. I think we're working towards the right solution. We'll just see how it shakes out.
Well, this will be on our agenda. Will it be discussion or vote?
Discussion.
Discussion, that means there'll be a vote of some, either on a policy or an ordinance fairly shortly thereafter, so.
Thank you.
Last but not least, presentation from Public Works regarding a rate study for the landfill. Eric.
Seem to always be last. Thank you, council. I appreciate your time in hearing this study we had done. It's going to change gears a little bit, so we're going to talk about additional revenue possibilities rather than expenditures. But the county and the solid waste department conducted a rate study in 2018. This was done by New Gen Strategies and Solutions. Basically, it was done, solid waste is an enterprise fund, so it's funded by tipping fees. We want to make sure and ensure that we're fully recovering our cost of service. So we'll discuss some of what came out of this study, some proposed rate increases, how that looks in terms of recovery. We can talk about the market analysis and how the market will react to that, and just going forward from there. No. Is that the green button? Oh, come on. All right. So this first slide basically just represents the revenue requirement. We basically looked at every individual function of the department, from administration to every service provided, and how much revenue would be required to fully recover that. We're talking full recovery of operations, O&M, capital cost, depreciations, and things like that. So this basically just depicts over time what the revenue requirements would be for each individual function, and then the overall each year, the revenue requirements. So based on that, and it'll go beyond this, but the rates were established. Now, for those who don't know, the current rates are for MSW are $39.50, and C&D and some of the outlying C&D materials, brush, concrete, is all $27.50. This was actually last raised in 2015. It went up, I believe, by $2. $2 in MSW. It went from $37.50 to $39.50 in 2015, and then it went up to $2.50 in C&D. So the
That's
proposed,
per ton, correct?
What's that?
That's per ton, not per.
This is all per ton.
Yes.
So the proposed for MSW is $42 in this next upcoming fiscal year, followed by the next year going up an additional $1 to $43. C&D is a pretty significant jump from $27.50 to $34, and then another $4 jump in the next year to $38. Again, I'll talk about the market analysis in a second, but concrete, brick, and asphalt and brush, given the availability and what's out there, where the residents can take these and industries, we didn't go up as much, and I'll show you how it recovers from that, but we're proposing 32 and then 34. Tires and metal will remain the same. But just to show you, this next slide shows you the recovery with the current rates. If we stay at the current rates, we are negative $578,000 in this next fiscal year, based on our cost to serve and the estimated tonnage to come in. You see that actually goes up a little more every year. I didn't put the cumulative, but adding all that up is pretty significant. So what does it look like with the proposed rates? We are recovering completely within this next fiscal year. In the black, it's $71,000, and then continuing to recover from there on out. So that basically the study just kind of proposes that these rates be raised to recover completely. One thing I talked about was the market analysis. We kind of did that in-house. We're just a little concerned about the large increase in rates and what that will do in this area. So we did a little comparison of the surrounding disposal options, and we think we're still our rates are consistent and or lower with any other disposal options in the area that are here. So and I have those if anyone needs them. But our next steps would be, I'd just like to have this discussion and possibly go before council to adopt the study and move forward with an ordinance to put these new rates possibly into effect July 1, 2019.
Just curious as to why you're doing the largest increase on one of the options that is already making money, and the option that's losing us the most money, which is MSW, is getting the smallest increase.
That is what the consultant recommends, and it's basically because C&D has the biggest opportunity to make up that option. And then it goes along with that market analysis. If we start getting up and increasing MSW above what we propose, there are other options within this area there where we can now take the possible billable tons that would be coming to us, they may be diverted elsewhere to another disposal option, which would in turn decrease our overall what we need.
Robert, if I can kind of sort of add to that, a lot of these rate studies that are done, it's sort of like what are your expenses is what your rates need to be. What was very interesting about this is there are a lot of local competition. And so that was incorporated in this rate study. It wasn't, oh, we can take it up to here. No, we can't. There's a market in place, and this is where the market's at currently. So, dealing with rate studies, this was quite enjoyable because you're actually dealing with a private sector out there you're competing against. So again, this wasn't markup to cover all our costs. This was more mark to market with what it can bear. And this is a fund that 2 of the last 3 years has lost about $1.5 million. And last year, it stayed in the black because we didn't have a lot for post-closure cost in the actual expenditures for the year. But this is something that needs to be done. Otherwise, this fund is going to start drawing from the general fund. We'll be in the situation where Greenville County is, where their landfill's not supporting itself. So the price levels, y'all should feel comfortable that they've been marked really to what the market can bear and what our competition is at. And it's necessary for this fund to do this, to not get in the red and start drawing on the general fund. So.
With the recycling, given the fact that we now don't have markets for a lot of the recycling that we're doing, how much of, I guess, which category does this fall into if it's required to be disposed of or put into the landfill? Where would this fall in there?
Sorry, I don't understand.
If you're required to put the recycling that we don't have a market for into the landfill,
Gotcha.
which category is this fall in?
That would fall under MSW. So that's a huge consideration in moving forward with the recycling tipping fees that we've been discussing, is landfill diversion. So if you don't have that option for recycling, that then has to go to a landfill, which you're then paying $39 or proposed $42 a ton to dispose of.
So how much of that, I guess, last year how much was disposed? Or did we calculate that and identify how much recycling was put into MSW?
No, we did not. Our recycling last year, internally, York County, we were sending it to an outside third-party vendor before we opened our MRF. So it was actually going with the assumption that it was all being recycled. It was all recycled material, and we were getting, I guess, a buyback for that. But so no, I don't know how much of that went in. Operating in the 6 months that we've operated the MRF now, it's about 15% of what we're bringing through is ending up in the trash.
And we pay to take the MSW to Richland County?
Correct.
What do we pay per ton when it goes there?
It's 29, some just below 30 currently.
So we're basically
That's a big chunk of what
paying as much as what we're charging, we're paying, so we're not really making a dime off of that, so.
I just want to follow up on Robert's question. With regards to the MSW, can you tell me why it would be a bad thing to miss out on volume that is costing us money?
We'd have to play with that, I guess, a little bit. The study was based on the volume that we have been receiving. So I guess I don't know what that balance is. Well, I'll follow up on that.
Sure. So I guess my question is, if we're losing money there on an incremental basis, for every load, obviously, we're losing money. Why would we be concerned that that volume is going to go elsewhere?
From the other disposal option available in this area.
Right. Why would we be concerned if someone else is able to handle that at a more competitive or favorable rate for them? Why would we be concerned that we're losing that volume if we're losing money on an incremental basis?
Eric, can I try to answer that here? We have a lot of that stuff is our own trash that we're dropping off over there right now. And that revenue coming in, I would look at it as incremental. A lot of our expenses are fixed costs from that landfill. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the incremental revenue coming in is helping cover a lot of the fixed costs that we've got.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
It doesn't say any member comments, but anybody have anything to add? All right, y'all, we are adjourned. Thank y'all for the workshop.